His goal is stated is that he wants to sort of reverse takeover of the Conservatives. And the way things are going, that is not impossible.
Well, that is the state of play today on the election campaign trail. Let's talk to our political commentator, Theo Usherwood, who's here in the studio with me. Theo, let's start with that reform poll and Nigel Farage reacting to it, calling it an inflection point. A vote for Conservatives is now a vote for Labour in the red wall, at least. Just analyse that.
He's right. It is an inflection point because what it allows Nigel Farage to do, and he's jumped straight onto this in the debate last night, is to say that reform is the official opposition. So what that means is that the Conservatives previously have said up until this point, and they continue to say that if you vote for reform, you're voting for Labour. There'll be a Labour supermajority, and therefore don't vote for reform because you will in effect give Keir Starmer the keys to number 10. But not just that, you'll give him the ability to do what he wants, a blank check, because there won't be any effective opposition in the House of Commons to legislation that he might want to bring forth. There's that argument about the socialist state that the Tories are making. But now, of course, in that YouGov Times poll, Farage's reform has actually gone ahead by 1 point of the Conservatives. So he's saying legitimately, from his point of view, in terms of the popular vote, reforms the opposition. And that meant today that he could say he wants a place during that debate on the 26th of June, that BBC debate, when it's Keir Starmer versus Rishi Sunak. He deserves to be in taking part in that debate, of course, as well. And of course, Mr. Sunak and Keir Starmer want Nigel Farage nowhere near it because of the questions that they will get about their policies and immigration. So it is a real moment in this campaign. It's a really crucial moment because it changes the dynamic.
In the midpoint of the campaign. And I'll come back to Labour and those warnings about a super majority in inverted commas, because we've had a listener message in about that. I'd like to put that to you. But just before we do that, midway in the campaign, and as you say, it's a turning point, but it's the same old sort of message from the Tories on tax and, Labour's secret tax plan. Unravel that.
Okay, so there are 4 taxes which Labour have explicitly said are not going to increase. Corporation tax is going to be capped at 25%. There'll be no increases to national insurance, no increases to income tax, and no increases to VAT. They're set. What Labour haven't said is they haven't given the same cast iron guarantees around capital gains tax. So they've said they have no plans to increase capital gains tax. Now, at the moment, capital gains tax is only paid out when you sell a second property, or you sell your second home, or you sell stocks and shares. That's when you pay capital gains tax. What's interesting about the Tory argument today, off the back of the debate last night, is they're trying to make the argument that Angela Rayner didn't deny that they could apply capital gains tax to your primary residence. So if you sell your home, the argument from the Tories is Labour would tax the profits that you make on that. However, to be fair to Angela Rayner, the deputy leader of the Labour Party, she was never asked to deny. And I've just got the exact exchange here from the transcript. Penny Mordaunt. So you are not going to raise capital gains tax? Question mark. Angela Rayner. There's nothing in our manifesto that means we have to raise capital gains tax. No. So she hasn't, of course, denied that Labour would apply capital gains tax to your primary property, which of course would affect millions, whereas actually on your second home, it affects far fewer people. But to be fair to Rayner, she was never asked to. So you can only deny something when you're asked to deny something.
Indeed. And just finally, we've had this message in from Carl saying, please explain to us why a supermajority is more dangerous to democracy than a majority of 80. So this is, Labour's sort of playing down this idea of a supermajority because obviously it wants to encourage people to go out and vote rather than stay at home, or possibly reform voters switch back to the Conservatives. But just answer that question if you would.
So what the Tories are trying to do is they're trying to draw a distinction between a Labour government led by Keir Starmer, where there can be an effective opposition, where you could have Conservative MPs on the backbenches, potentially forming alliances with Liberal Democrats, the SNP, perhaps Labour rebels who don't like Keir Starmer, a particular piece of legislation that Keir Starmer has brought forward, and forming alliance and actually providing an effective opposition by voting down pieces of legislation. And we saw that even when Boris Johnson won that majority of 80, Conservative MPs were quite effective at forming alliances with Labour and causing problems on particular issues, thinking about lockdown restrictions that were close to their hearts. The argument from the Tories about a supermajority is that it quote unquote becomes a socialist state under Keir Starmer, and he can do what he wants. You end up with a very, very small opposition, and because the numbers aren't there in the opposition, it's impossible for Conservative MPs to form any sort of meaningful alliances with the SNP, with Liberal Democrats and Labour rebels to actually block legislation. So Keir Starmer, as the Tories are putting it, would have a blank slate and blank check, and what they're hoping is that will spook Conservative voters enough to think, oh my goodness, what could happen under Keir Starmer if he gets that? I'm going to stick with the Tories. There's some knock-on effects as well around select committees. If you've got very few MPs, can you ever chair a select committee? And do you end up with those giving evidence in front of the select committee who have the same interests of the government, not actually being subject to effective scrutiny, because the MPs on the select committee are primarily MPs who are on the side of the government.
Theo Usherwood, thank you very much for that comprehensive analysis, and we'll be hearing from both the main parties, the Conservatives and Labour, leading representatives from both parties after 5 o'clock, so stay tuned for that.
Very unusual for a party to concede midway through during an election, and but it reflects. Certainly, I've been talking to lots of Conservative candidates in seats that the party, used to win, in seats that the party currently holds, and they're very downbeat and depressed. And in fact, I think the fact they're so depressed means that they were able to speak for me for longer than they might have done.
Oh, that's a
if
sign,
they were out
Michael.
seriously canvassing. But I think in a way, Shap's had a point. I think a supermajority. I mean, if Labour were to get, say, 500 MPs, which the way things are going is not beyond possibility, it would mean that every week 2/3 of them wouldn't need to be there. They'd still but they'd be up against 150 combined opposition MPs, and they would just be able to do what they liked. 2/3 of the parliamentary party could just stay at home in their constituencies and leave the rest of it and take it in turns to run the show in London. And already the Labour High Command, Morgan McSweeney and his friends have reduced the number of likely rebels in Parliament to a tiny number. Well, they don't need to worry about that. There's no way that, at least in the early days, that there's going to be much dissent. I think it's rather dangerous, really, that you have had, Labour has been, not misleading us, but they haven't been as honest as they might be about a lot of their policies, particularly their economic policies. And now they're going to have a majority where things will just sail through. Throughout his career, he's been after the Conservative Party, even though he's a former Conservative. And, his goal, is stated it, is that he wants to sort of reverse takeover of the Conservatives. And the way things are going, that is not impossible. I mean, certainly he would be very welcome with the grassroots. And the way things are going, you can see the Conservatives being reduced to 100 seats, fewer than 100, the way things are going. I mean, I suspect it won't be as low as that, but I wouldn't rule it out. And in those circumstances, all sorts of things are possible. Although the parliamentary party is likely to be much more centrist than the ordinary grassroots. And whether the Brexit party will end up as the second party in the number of votes, I doubt it, actually. I think the Conservatives will make a comeback. But if that were to happen, just think of also the effect that what people would think about our electoral system that produces a party coming second and ending up perhaps with one MP or two MPs